So now we would like to bring up Miss Jasmine Smith, who is going to speak to you about an important woman to her in her life, her mother, Vera.
Greetings, everyone. My name is Jasmine Smith, and I'm speaking on behalf of my mother, Vera Williams. My mother is legally blind, and she also has multiple sclerosis. She was diagnosed at the age of 25. Thank you. And upon that time, we started living with my grandparents, who became the caregivers of both of us. Upon 2011, my grandmother took ill, and then I stepped in as a full-time caregiver. My mother was already in a program with the state called the Independent Waiver Program. This program pretty much ensures that those that are disabled and elderly that meet within the qualifications can receive care. Those that are respite, day work programs, and thus forth. There had never pretty much been a problem prior before my grandmother taking ill. But once I stepped in as a full-time caregiver, being power of attorney and thus forth, it was literally everything was halted. For about 3 months, we didn't know where the application process was. And then that's when I stepped in and started working with Senator Dalen Leach's office to pretty much try to figure out exactly what was going on with this application. Their office wasn't for sure what was going on, and even their office in Harrisburg. For almost a year, the application was lost. We found out it was sitting on desk, and thus forth. Finally, in January 2012, my mother was finally approved through the state system to receive under the Independent Waiver Program. We were excited because my grandmother had just passed away in the latter part of October 2011, and we thought that this part of our life was going ahead. We tried to go back to our old agency that my mother was with, which is Liberty Resources in Philadelphia, but upon finding out they were no longer accepting consumers based upon the budget cuts with Governor Corbett. We then solicited and reached out to a couple different agencies, but they were also not accepting consumers, which are people that are under the Independent Waiver Program because of the budget cuts. We finally found one, which was in the location, we live in Delaware County. One was in Wayne, Pennsylvania, and the other office they had was in North Philadelphia. And so pretty much it was 15 minutes away from our house, and we're originally from North Philadelphia, so it wasn't anything. We called in, we drove around for the appointment, and my GPS just kept putting me across the street from my high school. And I thought it was strange because my high school was in Radnor, and it kept, the location was in Wayne. So that was the first red flag. And so upon calling them to find out exactly where the location was, we found out the service corps coordinator was actually still in the office. And she gave a lot of different, things that were going on. But because we wanted to press forward with everything, we said, fine, we'll take it, let's get it going. Let's get this application process going. And then they promised that my mom would be in a work day program because my mother's a college graduate. She's educated, even with her disabilities. And then as a caregiver that I will also be compensated, to take care of her. About a month and a half went past and my mother still had not received any services and I was not receiving any care to take care of her. Upon that time, I started working back with Senator Dalen Leach's office to try to figure out exactly what was going on. Because every time that we talked to this agency, we kept ran into circles and holes and red tape. Finally, I reached out to the Department of Aging, and from that point, we found out that the agency was actually had applied for services, and they had charged the state for services that they had not rendered to my mother. Upon that time, I then reached out to Congressman Patrick Meehan in our area because it was now a federal and a state issue. The state of Pennsylvania receives over 3 grants from the federal government that have to be accoladed for. And so for us, there was no oversight, because you're charging for services not rendered. Financially, it put us in a very tough situation because we had just lost my mother's mother, my grandmother, and we weren't able to touch her estate due to some lawsuits that, with her case. And so I had stopped working. So pretty much the only income that we were expecting to come in was with taking care of my mother because it's a full-time job. After researching, I contacted Attorney General's office, both federal and state. I solicited the NAACP, multiple groups and organizations to try to figure out exactly how are we supposed to get services if a state agency is not trying to help with probing even an investigation. We contacted Governor Corbett's office as well, and to no avail. Good Morning America contacted us to do a preliminary interview, and when Governor Corbett's office found out, the whole interview got shut down. Needless to say, 2 weeks later, we had the Inspector General's office at our house. They had called 8 o'clock in the morning, and they presented themselves in terms of probing investigation. The ironic part was that I also had contacted them when I contacted Attorney General's office, and they said because of jurisdictions that they couldn't, do the investigation. So it was very ironic that they showed up the door when initially they said that they couldn't do the investigation. At that point, I felt that our life was not just being in harm's way, but it was just very costly for my mother. I've reached out to our church, Eden Tabernacle Baptist Church, Pastor Alan Waller, to disclose exactly our main issues of concern, not just for myself, but for my mother being disabled and being blind. They also solicited letters out to Governor Corbett's office to assure them that even though they're watching us, they were watching them as a form of protection. So pretty much nothing happened. Nothing happened. So from 2010, the end of 2010, to 2012, around September, October, nothing happened with this agency. They were never placed under investigation. They were never placed on suspension, nothing. Finally, we were able to go to another agency where we ran into the very same problems. It wasn't as drastic, but it was still some of the same issues that were continuously going in the independent waiver program for those that are disabled and elderly. Make a long story short, at this procedure where we are right now is that my mother's case, the first part of it is going to grand jury. After Kathleen Kane got into office, she then started to reach out to those who had major issues with Governor Corbett, his administration, and all the different departments. So my mother has gone through an enormous situation with her medical issues in relation to, the fight, as we all have sit here and through the testimonies. And for me, it wasn't just about my mother. What I figured out and after doing thorough investigations is that there are thousands and thousands of families and people that are disabled and elderly that are currently going through the same issue. There was a paraplegic that couldn't get help for over 6 months due to Governor Corbett outsourcing payroll companies for the agencies out to Massachusetts. So you're now placing these people in arm's risk. So for us, we started a coalition called Victory for Vera under my mom, because we wanted to ensure that she also received the rights and all the things that she had paid into the system, and also if she had not. But to make sure that those behind us, because we've realized that this is not the first time this has ever happened, that those that came behind us were able to live in a structure and a system that were provided for. So at this present moment, we're turning everything into a foundation and really wanting to ensure that, we can help and gather as much attention as possible, because this is just not a state of Pennsylvania issue. This is a world, across the board country issue. Throughout this, President Clinton in the 2012 election, 2000 Democratic Convention, he had spoke about the governors Republican governors cutting a lot of Department of Aging funding. Literally, that's the same thing that, we're going through as well. So I speak on behalf of my mother. We're currently going through a couple different things financially, but yet and still we persevere. We had a house fire in May, which we possibly think could have been corrupted by the government due to the simple fact that my mother's case alongside with 12 other cases was going to open up the state of Pennsylvania in a way that we know that would not deem feasible for Governor Corbett. And so my mother right now is in rehab. She has to learn how to walk and talk again. The 3 rooms that were technically burnt in the fire, that were charred, there was a gentleman that came 3 days before the fire, and the only rooms that he stayed in were the 3 rooms that were charred to the point of non-existence. But my mother, if she were here, and she definitely wanted me to thank you, Sherry. Sherry knows both my mother and I very well, for the opportunity. She is the strongest woman that you would ever want to meet. She's inspired so many people. Excuse me. And every day I look at her and I say that, thank you. As much as I want to give up, I can't. She's the same woman that says that God will never give you no more than you can bear, repeatedly. And she always says there's a way out of no way. And regardless of your religious choosing, your demographic, your race, just understand that there are people that are hurting. And at some point, everyone is going to have to take care of someone, whether that is a child, a parent, a sibling, a mate, or whoever. And you want to make sure that those things are in place to make sure that there are assistance. And so for us and for myself, I stand before you and I ask you to go on Facebook. She has a page called Victory for Vera. You can follow her story. She has a page on changeorg.com. She has a website, victoryforveraaswell.com, and you will see exactly where we are in the steps and procedures of not just making sure that she has the help and the assistance that she needs, but also the countless others that are affected in the state of Pennsylvania and prayerfully one day throughout the United States. We want to make sure that this is a national issue. We want to make sure that those that did not deem what they should have done, Congressman Patrick Meehan and thus forth and those others, are held accountable for the oversight that they've done and not done. So thank you again for your time. Thank you, Sherry. You are truly, truly a warrior, and I look up to you for all that you've done. Thank you again.